This summer, you can help Black Rifle Coffee and the Boot campaign raise $1 million for veterans. All you need to do is grab a can of ready-to-drink coffee from local grocery or convenience stores. From May 31st through August 31st, every can of ready-to-drink coffee you buy will contribute to making this massive donation possible. As one of the top veteran-focused nonprofits in the country, the Boot campaign is on a mission to provide life-changing aid and benefits to veterans suffering from invisible wounds like post-traumatic stress. Each can you drink gets us closer to hitting $1 million for vets. So grab a can of Black Rifle ready-to-drink coffee from the BRCC website or your local grocery or convenience store. Let's raise a can together and keep fueling Americans for a good cause. It's a little different podcast. Let's do it this way. Tell me your name, your background in the military, and then what we're talking about today.
Okay. First of all, I appreciate you having me here. All of this is of my own experiences, and I'll give you everything firsthand. And if not, I brought receipts.
Yeah.
All right. So my name is Dan Robert, retired from the U.S. Army. I was a staff sergeant. I finished out my 12-year time with a medical retirement after a few different things happened. I was the first named plaintiff against the Pentagon in the court case over the vaccine mandate. A lot of stuff went into that. I spent my time in the military focusing entirely around the idea of take care of the men and you'll never be wrong. And that leadership guidance that was given to me has been my guiding light through the entire ordeal. I held strong to my values and my beliefs throughout that thing. I tried to help as many people as I possibly could. And, now separated, I guess it's a little easier for me to speak freely about some of the stuff that, I had pending litigation and stuff at the time. And, there's a lot of danger around being a person who's willing to speak up in such a situation, which, like I said, we'll definitely get to talk about.
So, yeah. So we'll back up because this is obviously over the pandemic and the things that were taking place.
Right.
So you're on active duty at the time. Were you a drill at the time?
So when COVID kicked off in March of 2020, I was actually in the Drill Sergeant Academy in Fort Jackson. And we had got word that this thing was happening. And they told us like, hey, you guys are not going to have a graduation. People are not going to be there because they might be trying to space people out. And then they canceled just the last week of my course. We had taken our final tests and it was a combatives refresher and most of us were certified. So we're like, oh man, just let us go. And then after lunch one day told us like, hey, this is getting pretty serious. We don't know more about this COVID thing, but you guys are getting cut loose. You have 3 hours to clear the barracks, get back to your home units or whatever. Showed back up, and then it was minimum manning. So I graduated the school, and then I got kind of put on hold on my PCS orders to Fort Benning to actually start the job for a little bit.
Okay, and then you get, at some point, the notification that, hey, this is a Department of Defense mandate, right? And this is obviously coming from the Pentagon. When we say suing the Pentagon, I think DOD, but there's a lot of entities that run and operate out of that.
There is.
You get it trickled down and saying, hey, like anthrax, because I was the anthrax generation where It was like, hey, man, you want to go down range? You want to go to war? Like, yes. Well, then you got to get this anthrax. I'm like, yeah, but I don't want that in my body. They're like, well, do you want to go to war? And I'm like, well, I'll weigh war and the desire and more than I will whatever it is that you're going to put in me. I mean, they could have said it, we're going to give you AIDS. And I would be like, yeah, well, give me that dose of AIDS. Let me go overseas and do some work.
Yeah.
So you get mandated and told, and then it's against your belief. And what belief is that? Where you're just like, I'm not doing this.
So it started off with I had basically, because I'd been in a motorcycle accident, and as you'd heard before, broke my back in a parachute accident. I walked in a cane for a year and a half, came back from that, 2 knee surgeries. I had a lot of time around a lot of different doctors in the military, which put me in contact with people that became very important whistleblowers down the road, which some of the names which people that said hi, by the way, we'll talk about, so those people had asked me like, hey, this thing, I want to see what the date was, August 9th of 2021, Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, had said that he's going to mandate the shot, whether it seeks FDA approval or not. And then he said, and I will seek the president's approval if otherwise, whatever comes first. So if you know anything about EUA or like experimental use, right, or emergency use, emergency use authorization, it can only exist if there is no treatment that is approved for the thing. And the only way that it can be mandated is if it is approved by the president and has to be tied to a very specific need for a very specific amount of time, usually an act of war, like to deploy. In an emergency, you would need it at the time if he would sign it. So a lot of people called this the Biden vaccine mandate, and the truth is he never did. Inside the military, this was always Lloyd Austin's action. So on August 24th of the same month, it receives its initial BLA approval. Now that process is different than a full FDA labeling guidance and like production and everything. So we heard that the Pfizer vaccine is going to be labeled Comirnaty, and then that's going to be the approved one. So Lloyd Austin puts out this memo and says, hey, you will receive, and this verbiage is really important, you will receive an approved vaccination in accordance with FDA labeling guidance. So he protected himself there, because he didn't order us to take an EUA vaccine, because under Title 10, Section 1107 and 1107 Alpha, you can't mandate it. You have to, there's informed consent, and this is all stuff, these words might be popping up over the last 3 years, you might have heard, right? So he said that you're going to get the approved one, but it was too early. It was too early for it to be
the same one.
Right.
They just labeled it something different.
So what they did is kind of like, you have several kids. Did you pick out a name for your kid before it was actually born? Same thing. This is them picking out a name and approving it long before it was even fully developed.
Wow.
Exact same thing, right? Because there's a process, and it takes about 3 years, which is interesting because we're at that point right now, and what just happened.
Yeah.
All of those things just got pulled from the market now that the post-authorization studies are finished. So he signaled that he knew that we didn't have the right thing. So that gets handed down. I filed my lawsuit because of my connections with certain people. Like I said, I was asked
before the lawsuit.
Yeah.
How did it go down with you personally? Were you like, hey, they want us to take a vaccine? I'm like, I'm not taking a vaccine. I'm not taking something that's crazy. And then were you just like, hey, platoons aren't, going up the chain of command. Yeah. I'm not doing this. And then how did that work out?
Right. So good question. And I kind of skipped over it. So as a drill sergeant, it's kind of your responsibility to be a master of regulations, right? If you have female soldiers or people of different, ethnic backgrounds or whatever, or like religious backgrounds, you have to know the exemptions for things. You have to know all of the regs to a T all of the time. Because if you're going to make those corrections, you need to be an expert, which I respect a lot. And I ask that of the community as a standard.
It's not just yelling at people.
It isn't. No. Yeah. And that's honestly, as you do it for a long time, that's like your least favorite part, seeing them grow is what I cared about. And then, so for me, AR 40-562, section 2.6, appendix Charlie, if you guys want to look that up. If not, I have a copy here. It talks about exemptions. And a big one was if you have had a disease like COVID and you have a serologic blood test or a positive test previously, you're exempt. You do have to file for it, but you do not have to get this thing. And I was like, it's an EUA. It's already looking kind of weird. And I want my guys to know that they have a choice, because like here it is right in the regs, like black and white. And 40-562 has different names, but spans across all branches.
Is that clause, for lack of better terminology, supporting natural immunity as like an out? Like, hey, you already had it. Why were we going to give you something you already had?
That's exactly what it is, right? That's exactly what it is. And there's, like I said, there was an element of proof to that, right? So I saw that, and I was letting people know there's a choice. And now what triggered my response was that they were like, no, there's no exemptions. I'm like, well, hold on. Like, I was like, yeah, there is. Here they are. And this is what they say. And then they're like, no, absolutely not. Put it away. You're getting it. And it was just like, it was such an overwhelming response at the time.
That almost seems like a fearful response, both in the profession, because I don't want to lose my career or get in trouble,
right?
And also just do it, because that's just what you do. You just do it. It's like, yeah, but I'm showing you the reg, the law, and I'm telling you that we don't have to. And they're just like, well, yeah, just get it done.
That's exactly how it was. And that's the thing is, like I said, Lloyd Austin's memorandum was very specific. You will get the FDA approved one.
Yeah.
But the way it was enforced down through the chain of command, right? Telephone game, one step away moves it this much. How many steps between the Secretary of Defense and a company commander on Fort Benning in a basic training unit are there that the information is going to change? And then it's just, no, they have to get one, period. And then, so Terry Adoram, and I want to say she was the like Undersecretary of Defense for like, she was like of Health and Human Services. I can't remember her exact title, but she came out with a letter after the Navy approached her and said, hey, we tried to order this approved shot you said existed. And the NDCs, which were not in the database, it says it's unorderable right on the website. So they're like, can we get the approved thing? And then she came out with a memo and said, just use the EUA stuff as though it were the approved thing.
Wow.
So like I said, exact verbiage. So she kind of took the hit for the way she enforced Austin's mandate, and she kind of became like the target, like a sacrificial,
scapegoat.
Scapegoat. There we go.
What basic training company were you at? What battalion and company were you at?
Bounced around a little bit. Alpha 219 was my primary.
Oh, it's Charlie 119.
Okay, right on
Is
top
that
of the
called
hill.
that Hell's Kitchen? That was like we were like Candyland. Or something.
I think it bounces around.
Yeah.
So they're
Charlie 119.
those are that's actually one of the few I think integrated like male and female platoons and stuff. now,
Really?
too. It is, yeah. So there's only a handful out there, and I think that's one of them.
Wow. Okay. Damn
But
it.
yeah, right down the hill from your guys' DFAC, that's where 219 was. So that's
Okay.
where.
Yeah. 219's right down the road, and you're going through because you have a company first sergeant and a company commander, right?
Correct.
How did they act? Like, what was the exact moment when you're like, I ain't doing this, and they're like, you're doing it, and you're like, I'm not doing this.
So they kind of they came from the soft community, right? Which is like this plays into a really important thing. So like my first sergeant was a sergeant first class. He's a Green Beret, really solid dude. I respect him a lot. So
Really?
yeah, absolutely.
Is he still on active duty?
He is, and I'll spare him my spitting that out right now.
Who's this guy?
Sometimes he would play kind of dumb with brigade, where it's like. He'd be like, I don't know. Yeah, we don't do that over there. So he would kind of like let us get the job done and stay out of our way a lot. He respected us and like empowered his NCOs. He's like, oh yeah, I wasn't aware. And then just like, let us do our job. I don't mean break rules or haze people. I mean like get the job done as it needs to, with respect to what needed to get done as NCOs. And then my company commander was from regiment. Now to have him go there to a basic training company, you wonder like, what did he do wrong?
Sometimes it's a bump up. Like sometimes they got to do staff time.
Yeah.
And some of them will float binning. If he was in third bat, they'll float binning.
Yeah.
Or they just are shitbags.
Yeah. I mean, he was, like I said, he treated me with a lot of respect. So he had a way of kind of being like, okay, if you're saying no, he's like, I'm going to let this sit on my desk until they ask. And they say, hey, wait, is Robert getting it? And then he'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. He told me this a week ago. So he like kind of dragged his feet on it to give me time, and then
Give you time to make the decision to do it.
Well, I think that it was kind of like he knew I was working on this case, and he knew who I was speaking with.
Okay, yeah.
And I think, and I kind of outlined this to him. I was like, hey, look, sir, I was like, I am challenging this as an unlawful order, right? And I'm telling you that like you don't have the authority to tell me to get it. I was like, and then I even at one point drafted a paper, said like, hey, like formal Army memorandum. Are you telling me to get this EUA vaccination? Are you telling me I have to? Like, yes or no, and sign here. And then he's like, he brought it to Brigade Legal and came back, and he was kind of like, I was advised my career would end quickly if I signed this. So, I was like, I kept putting that in their box. But here's the important thing, right? I was getting pretty good at the like tradecraft side of legal stuff too in here, and he had to scan it up to Brigade Legal. So what could I do then? Is FOIA request all the traffic that they had a conversation about.
Yeah, that's important.
So I never really needed him to sign it. I just needed it to go up the food chain.
In the system, yeah.
And it made it all the way to the DOJ. They were reading it up in the Pentagon, and then that is when the phone call started. And they started calling down straight from the the Pentagon to my company commander. I mean, they wanted to know everything I was doing. Where am I? Who am I talking to? Do I tell the privates about this? Like, what is Robert eating for lunch? Like they wanted to know.
Jeez.
I mean, so they start digging, right?
What do you think their concern was? Is it because you were going against the grain and they didn't want any problems because they didn't want Lloyd Austin to bring drama on the unit?
So there's a lot of pieces to that, and like I'll try to not speculate, but I'll be very clear about what I don't think it was. And then I don't think it was an accident or just like a blind move because it's what we've always done. I will tell you that Lloyd Austin specifically still holds 30,000 shares of Tenet Health stock, right? Which are placed strategically all around military bases, all around the U.S. If a service member is going to get it off post or their families or anything, then for these shots were given for free to these clinics. For every one they distribute, they're reimbursed $40 to $70 for every single dose. Right. And you just think
what do you
about
mean? He had stock.
He had stock in making this mandate. So what I'm saying is there's a kind of a vested interest for him.
Like he had investments.
He did.
You have to be shitty.
It's all in his SEC files. It's public info. And
so Lloyd Austin has invested money in the back end of the infrastructure of the supply chain.
He does. And still, even in, when he took his office
my God,
as Secretary of Defense, he had to divest within a year from his Raytheon stocks just as well, when you read the formal like letter from him saying, hey, I sold it for this much or whatever, one, the math does not add up for what he said he made off of it, for what the opening closing numbers were. I don't need to get into that right now. The point is, something was always askew with those numbers, and a portion of it he said, and I'm just holding on to this. So I mean, we have another conflict of interest, right?
The fact that you're a general officer retired, that you were the
Right.
CENTCOM commander, and that you literally have stock in Raytheon, period, is insane. I couldn't,
Right.
as an E7 in SF, I couldn't bounce at a local club because they said, "Oh, you can't bounce at the local club because you're double dipping." Like it's against the regulation. You can't work a side hustle.
Which is not true.
Yeah, like I can't I can't make $15 an hour at a side hustle, but you could have millions of dollars of shares in Raytheon while you're doing Raytheon deals with the industrial complex. Like, get the out of my face.
$80 million hypersonic missile contract. Where did that just go?
Oh my God,
Right?
dude.
Raytheon, you know what I mean? Like you said, like this stuff is still happening.
Yeah.
So that's a piece of it, right?
So how do you get to a point where you're like, you know what? I'm going to sue the government. Like, I'm going to sue these guys.
So one of those doctors, who again was one of the whistleblowers down the food chain, which we're getting close to talking about, reaches out to me and says like, hey, listen, like, you're a smart dude. Like, you seem to have an idea. Like, no one's going to strong arm you mentally or physically. Like, I think you're a good representative for this thing.
Wait, some random doctor that's in the chain,
Somebody
he sees this happening?
I've been speaking to already.
Oh,
right.
okay,
So
okay.
a close friend. So they say, hop on this phone call with me. It's a Zoom call. So I get on it, and there's 2-star, 2-star, 3-star, Dr. Peter McCullough, if you know who that is.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Yeah. So here I'm
On
like
this call?
on this call, and I'm
Was staff sergeant.
yeah, it's Staff Sergeant from the hood down there living in Columbus, man. Like I say, you know, just off exit 3, you know, just like, oh man, what what is this? I was like, we got a problem. I was like, you know, and there's like 16 people on this call, and you can Google everybody in there except for me. Till after this, right? And I was just like, what is going on? And all of these people have information, and they're telling me, they're throwing words around that, like, if you want to dig deep into conspiracy sides, honestly, they've been right about a lot of it, and we can get into that eventually if you want. But they're like, this is why this is happening, and this is why we believe that it is going to compromise the strategic capability of the United States military. And they said it was an ideological purge inside of the force. They want to see who's going to buck the system, right? The shot never mattered at the time. So they said, we need somebody to do it. And like, they asked me, and I was like, man, we got stars on your chest. Like, why are you guys not being the people? Some of them were retired. I didn't know at the time, because it's just how their name showed up. Right. But they were just like, no, we need somebody like that's going to be there, and we know is going to like fight the whole way through this. So I was like, you know what? Take care of the men. You'll never be wrong. I was like, I have an absolute responsibility. The drill sergeant motto is the Army motto, is this will defend. Right. And like, I just took that to heart. Every part of the NCO creed, and I said, this isn't even a choice. I was like, this is my responsibility.
Yeah.
Unquestionably, these people need this of me. And I was like, and I'm going to be there for them. So I cut a deal with the lawyers that day. I said, hey, no money gets exchanged if you're okay with how this needs to move around. I was like, but you're my attorney until I have an honorable discharge. If it takes 5 years and I go to prison for 4 of them, you do not let me sit there and rot. You try every day until I'm free. Everybody kind of looked around the room and was like, yeah, agreed. Absolutely.
So they financed it.
So, yeah.
Obviously, big staff sergeant pay.
Yeah. Yeah, as you know, right?
Yeah.
And so they offered that. We drafted up all the paperwork. Lawyers sent stuff back and forth, and then we filed our initial case. It was like September 7th. I mean, shortly after Austin put his mandate letter out on the 24th. And then one of the attorneys, Todd Callender, comes back. And if you dig into Todd, he's a very mysterious individual who's been very successful in a lot of different careers. Todd comes back. He says, hey, do you want to go on Fox? Do you want to do an interview, and do you want to get the word out? I said, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people struggling out there with this choice, and they don't know they have rights. And I want to tell them, you know, and we didn't have a lot of information at the time. I was like, let's do Fox. So I had to notify Fort Benning PAO, and like, boom.
What did they say?
Gag order. Fort Benning caught fire. Like, everybody, their phone calls rip in every direction. They're terrified. They're like, oh my God, what is he going to say? Like, we got to shut Robert up. And then PAO, somebody got a hold of it. They're like, dude, you can't, like, you cannot, because he has a legal case. As long as he doesn't talk about that, like, you cannot step on him for this. Like, get out of his way.
Good. So they're advocating for you a bit.
Well, eventually, they were kind of trying to, you know, CYA, right? So they, the PAO formally trains me, right? I go over there and I sign an agreement. I will take your training, if you allow me to do this podcast and stay out of my, not podcast, interview on Fox and stay out of my way, right? So they agree. And so like get dressed up and go over there. We do like mock interview stuff, and it's like a murder board if you've ever heard about that. I mean, they're just ask you anything. Oh, so you're saying this, like, and just trying to like get you sweating and pull you off. Like, yeah, they're doing
That's
that.
Funny.
They're so good at their job.
Scenario-based training.
Yeah, it's so good at their job. So, they put me through a lot of that and then told me some important information. And then, I got to go do the interview. Now, by the time I got to do the interview, there's Fox in your earpiece. And it was just an over the phone thing, like a video. There's Fox in your ear and they're trying to hype you up. They're like, oh, remember all that stuff you said about being betrayed and it's unlawful and like they're criminals and like they're like trying to fire you up, So then by the time you get on the air, you think they just want you to come out the,
hype squad.
Yeah. So they do that and it's hard.
Down.
You're hearing that in one ear, the other one, they're like, all right, roll on camera 3, going to Dan, and 3, 2. And like the guy's asking you questions and you're just kind of like, dude, this is hard to focus, man. But the training, it helped me a lot. So that interview goes up. I come back to work the next day, and there's everyone just waiting quietly to see me. And they're like, hey, battalion commander wants to talk to you. I'm like, oh, cool. So like they have this like initial counseling about it, which is just like it's just a formal record of a conversation. If people don't know what like a counseling is in the Army.
General counseling.
It's just saying, like we're just like, hey, we're at this conversation that basically they're like, hey, that you stepped out of line for whatever reasons. These are the rules we gave you. You broke them. I didn't. And then there's meetings at the G3 level over and over where they're trying to get rid of me. So Major General Donahoe, who was already under a lot of flack on Tucker Carlson for some of his Twitter stuff, and then like a little bit about grooming some of his younger lieutenants, his inappropriate relationships. So he holds these meetings on Fort Benning of like, how do we get rid of Robert? Get him out of the Army now. So all these captains have this meeting and then come back and they're like, hey, sir, he's doing everything right. Like this guy's doing it by the book. Like we cannot touch him. He's got constitutional rights. He's protected. And their decision was, nope, not good enough. Go back and try again. I'll see you again in 2 weeks. So they're making like an active effort to burn me at this point, right?
Wow.
So we're 2 months in. And I want to get to the big part right here just because I want to make sure this gets out and this gets said. So I finally get a court date, January 21st, 2022. I'm supposed to sit in front of a judge and I'm going to point all this information out. I've got Todd Callender. I've got David who's an attorney in Colorado. I've got Dale Saran, who beat the anthrax, shot in the 90s. And he's like, this is a battle drill for me, dude. He's like, we already have all the steps. I did this once before. We're going to crush it. So
where are you at? Where does this take place at?
It's going to be in Colorado. It was going to be.
Yeah.
I was going to be able to have them represent me just at distance. I can't remember the legal term for it, but just I was going to have to give a testimony over like a Zoom call, basically. Yeah. So on the 19th, my case gets dismissed. Up, gone, out of the air, right? Just no reason. And the judge just drops the thing. And Dr. Teresa Long calls me. And you might have seen her. She's a redhead, lieutenant colonel. She spoke with like Senator Johnson. She was one of the whistleblowers for the DMED data, right? You might have seen some of her speeches, right?
Yeah, she's been suppressed all over the place.
A lot. Peter Chambers and Sam Sigalov, all, like I said, friends of mine because of different parts of this, thing. So she calls me and she's in tears and she says, I think this is my fault. She said, I think they got a hold of what I have. And she tells me about the DMED data for the first time. And are you familiar with that at all?
Mm-mm.
So the DMED data, if you're familiar with VAERS, the DMED data is the Army's internal, not just vaccines, but injury reporting system. It is the most protected data set of medical information you could possibly ask for. Only military doctors can edit it. So she says, I pulled the DMED data and all the stuff we're worried about, infertility problems, myocarditis, like tumors, cancer, just every miscarriage, every horrific thing you can imagine, right? She's like, the numbers are so bad.
On a concentrated population with good data processes.
Right.
Where you can see.
And generally a healthier, and we know there's
a healthier,
But then the civilian populace, there are some standards, So she tells me, I think I transmitted this to Todd, she said, and he turned it into the court and the case got thrown out. So there's only a couple ways that could have happened. And what I found out is that Lloyd Austin identified us as a threat to national security. Now, to get that label, as you're well aware, that has to go through certain departments and certain approvals, which they...
Through the Department of Justice, through the FBI, as
and then
investigated.
DHS, which is on Fort Benning, right? So they labeled us a domestic threat. and then got our case thrown out, which I believe the only way it could work is through a FISA court because there was no communications about how it happened. So a protected communication happened, and the only way you can use a FISA court, right, is through like this DHS like whistleblower, like think Edward Snowden, right?
Yeah.
So like that same thing, like it had to be quiet. It had to make sure that I didn't get wind of it or whatever. So it gets thrown out. So I had put in exemptions because in Appendix C, it tells you that if you have like a pending court order that you're exempt from the vaccination until a decision is made, right? So I put this thing up and it was just pending. Next day, they had a letter, but I show back up to work. My commander's sitting there. He's like, hey, Pentagon called, like, here's your case dismissal. Here's your exemption denial because you no longer have a case. He's like, Rob, you have to go get the shot. And I was just like, oh, that was quick. That took months for me to pass up, and you had it in 11 hours from the case being dismissed.
They already had it lined out, ready to go.
They already had it lined. It just like
Who was that person who told you that?
It was my company commander.
Dude, I would have busted his ass.
Yeah, he's like, I don't know. He's like, I'm not sure what happened. He's like, I'm just showing you. And he was like very standoff all the time. I got this posture a lot. People are like, this is just what came down. And, so
instead of fighting for you, he's like the conduit either way.
A little bit, yeah. And like, while he did what he could in the end, like he still made that decision. And there was one other drill that was a vaccine refuser at the time that, I mean, he was eating just the worst of this stuff all the way up until they just pulled the mandate a couple months ago, right? This dude like held the line absolutely till the end, and he was going to lose everything. Another 12-year staff sergeant, right? Jump master, EIB, drill sergeant, perfect career, like everything you could ask for. And they were just, you're done. So that happens. The DMED data leaks. And then I start noticing different things, right? I've got a tail. Our phones are tapped, right? Like people are showing up talking to, our battalion and brigade commanders in suits. Like it looks like you think it does, but no one's talking to me. So we have to start getting crafty. We want to start trading information around and stuff. It's, a 2-hour SDR to go to the Starbucks up the street, 15 minutes from my house, just so I can put a thumb drive stuck to gum underneath the table to get to somebody else so it can get to my attorney from somebody else's email so that they don't capture our transmissions again. So like we had to go.
Do you think that was criminal investigate, like CID stuff, or do you think it was DOJ?
So part of it was CID because they actually arrested a bunch of my whistleblowers, people that had turned over like the ordering system because the military had said we can't even order the approved shot. So they turned that over as evidence, and CID rolled them up, arrested them, cuffed these dudes at work, took their work computers, their personal laptops, their phones.
What?
There is this crazy like witch hunt that starts inside, and that's why like whistleblowing is like, it's kind of a trap, and the protection doesn't exist. It's very like Frog and the Scorpion, if you will.
It's horrible.
It is. So the Scorpion is going to present that like, hey, I am this dangerous thing. I don't know what you expected from me. So just like the government's like, hey, we have whistleblower protection to tell us about our corruption. And then when it makes it back to us, you're surprised you got burned. Like,
yeah.
So that stuff starts. We end up getting a source to appeal this because they didn't give us a good reason. So $10,505 later, my attorneys are relicensed in 10th Circuit. We file an appeal.
Looking for a quick and easy way to grab your favorite Black Rifle Coffee roast? Well, you can find America's Coffee on the shelves of your local Walmart. Stock up on your favorite roast, as well as several Walmart exclusives you can't find anywhere else. No need to worry about waiting for shipping or having to drive all the way across town to find your BRCC coffee. Whether you're filling up for an early morning hunt or just need a pick-me-up during a busy day, stop by Walmart and grab a bag of Black Rifle Coffee today.
Exemption goes back up. Sir, I've got another exemption. I've got another case. Here's my filing. I don't need to get shot. Right. I'm not going.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it.
This is all while you're trying to do your damn job, by the way.
Yeah. So I'm healing from a motorcycle crash, an ACL repair surgery, and I'm a full-time drill sergeant during COVID, which our numbers are already down and hurting. So I've got classes of 220 dudes, and I'm working 24-hour shifts sometimes. I'm still trying to do that. And then I go home and I'm up for another whole day just trying to get these emails typed out and send this stuff up. Right. So we get the big report together, right? A 21-slide slideshow. Congress.
This is the appeal for all the stuff that happened, right?
Well, before that. Mm-hmm. So we get the chance to speak with House Armed Services Committee, right? On a burner phone, and we get everything out, and they're like, this is what we're interested in. So we're like, we get all of anybody that was involved, and we pull all this information together. 21-page slideshow. Here's all the data. Here's all the injuries. Here's everything that's going on. Here's why it's illegal. Here's Austin stocks, all of it, right? And we're like, this is it, boys. We're going to crush it. So they get this stuff. And what does Congress do? Man, they sit on it. They wanted dirt. They wanted dirt on somebody else on the hill. They wanted a trading card. They wanted to like get the henhouse gossip. And then, but did they change anything? No. So they sat on it, right? And then we're like, man, what happened? Like, you know, they just like, you heard dirt on Lloyd Austin and then you asked for this thing and then nothing happened. You didn't support us. So we just go on, you know, another 6 months goes by of this type of thing. And it's just like, we hit peak suicide rates for the U.S. military ever in history after the Afghan pullout. Military Freedom Keepers gave us those numbers and stuff on the crisis calls. So you've got people getting kicked out, don't know what to do. You've got people that are lost for all these reasons. Like you've got the people that are having a hard time with the Afghan pullout and feeling what they did was for nothing. And, you know, then I was working with multiple social media pages. We became the sin eaters for every terrible thing that was happening in the Army at once. Everybody's dumping on us like, please, you have all these connections, you can help get the word out. Like, I need help. It's sexual assaults, like kidnapping, murder, like everything you've seen in the news about like Fort Hood. People are trying to get it to us because they think we can help, and like we're trying, and we're drowning in it. We're drowning it. There's so much bad going on. So, you know, when I look back and I think about why did I do this, I think about, you know, the thousands of emails, text calls, in-person conversations I had that people told me, they're like, hey man, I was lost and I didn't know, and they were threatening to take everything, and you made me feel okay and I didn't feel crazy, and like you gave us a choice, you gave my family a choice, and I didn't have to like, you know, I didn't have to burn my values, you know, to try and keep this job. And they're like, so you kept a gun out of my mouth, you know, and like to hear that, I was like, man, it was worth it. Like,
You know you're doing the right
yeah,
thing.
so I get emotional about it, but it's like, man, it's so heavy. And, you know, and I still get those calls, and it's hard because that persecution never stopped. You know, you have guys like Britton Lindbergh, who's over here in 19th Group, and they kicked him and pulled his TRICARE 2 weeks before his kid was born. You know, and there's no humanity left in the thing.
Who's that? What happened with that case?
So Britton Lindbergh, he'd hate that I'm putting this out on social media as much as he, you know, already resisted doing it, but he has a rare blood disorder where he's already prone to blood clots. And the doctor said, you should not get this shot. Absolutely medically exempt, keep your job. And then when he brought that back to his command, they're like, no exemptions. Like I told you.
19th Group did that?
Yeah.
Dude, I'll fuck up some 19th Group command. I'll call the fucking general. I seriously
like
will. That shit frustrates me. 19th Group, 20th Group,
Yeah.
Yusufik. Like, there's no reason those dudes should not be setting a precedent for helping dudes out.
Right.
Especially like when you have guys like who have real medical conditions.
Right.
And you're like, you need to get it. So they pulled his TRICARE.
Yep.
And then 2 weeks before.
Yeah, he can't go to drill. He can't attend anything that he's pertaining to his job. And then like you lose your benefits and stuff during that time. Pull his TRICARE, like I said, 2 weeks before his kid's born.
We need to get him on the podcast.
It's easy.
That shit frustrates me.
It's
man.
an easy phone call. He's a good friend of mine.
So you get to a point where after they pull all, like they basically throw it out, your lawyer doesn't get communication on anything. They just say, hey, we are not telling you anything. Like it's dismissed, period.
Correct. Yeah, that's pretty much how it was. They're like, hey, this is it. Shut him up, get rid of him. And that, like, they pretty much, and the order, again, which came down in some of the emails, was like, here's Robert's dismissal, here's his exemption getting denied, kick him out. Like, it was like, hurry up and get rid of this dude. Like, they wanted to take it away from me so bad because I had become a center point and a face and a voice for this thing. And I was just, like I said, I was working so hard to help so many people. And like, I want to backtrack to something. When the original order came out, Colonel Kinney, I think was his name, he had looked through the paperwork too. He's like, oh, we can play that game. And he learned that involuntary vaccination was lawful if you have the approved thing, right? So he learned that was lawful, and he had said, yeah, we can involuntary vaccinate, and that means hold people down. That's a very euphemistic word to like tell you, we're going to hold you down, and we can stick people with this, whether they want it or not, and we're going to get our numbers. So like me as a drill, I'm like, that is not how we...
He put that out?
He put that out in an order that like I can show you. Like I said, I have the receipts.
He's saying you could involuntarily force people to take the shot.
Right. So it took our team having that conversation with him saying like, hold on, man. So let's go to Fort Hood. You want 4 or 5 male soldiers holding down a female soldier, screaming no while you penetrate her body with something she doesn't want. In any way that you ask that, that's sick, right?
Oh my God.
You want to go to Fort Rucker. You want to go to Alabama. Do you want 4 or 5 white soldiers holding down an African-American soldier, screaming no, experimental vaccination going in? Like, is this what you want? Is this how we treat people? And is this the optics you're okay with? And that's,
who's this dude?
Colonel Kinney. I can't remember his
He's
position.
probably a fucking general right now.
He's probably in charge of a lot more. So that's the thing, is that anybody that, bucked the system on this stuff got removed from position very quickly. So there was a brigade sergeant major that called me from Italy. He's like, hey, I'm command sergeant major, or sergeant major this, formerly command sergeant major. I lost my brigade. And he's like, I want to help. How do I throw my, bid in? How do I help? What you're doing, what information can I give you? And I was like, dude, I want to know what comes down to the brigade level, So like I said, we just all across the force, we were just seeing this, this purge, and it was happening quick. And then Marines were offering short outs. They're like, if you want to just accept the short out now, you can be gone within the next month. And a lot of people were like, I'm done with this. This is not how I want to see people treated. So on top of our numbers we're losing, on top of all the injuries, which I will let you look at this, and I will show you, like I said, the most protected set of data, which is one more thing about, on top of everything, now you got people that are watching guys like me go through this, this torture, and they're like, man, I saw what happened to Rob. I think I'm done with this. That could very easily have been me, guys that went along with it, right? So then they have retention numbers go down, and then recruiting. People are seeing what's happening, and they're like, man, I don't know. Army's a crazy place. They're fraught with, there's sexual assaults, there's murders, kidnappings, nobody cares. Here's all this forced vaccine order that seems to be illegal, and everybody had questions. And their conduct is part of what is responsible for our numbers now. And they can blame it on whatever they want. But the Army created, and all of the force broadly created, that perception and that problem of where they are sitting now on such low numbers. Now they're calling guys back. They're like, hey, we know we kicked you over COVID and you're on terminal leave and you already moved home to Missouri, but you're actually still on active duty. We tore the whole thing up. So come on back. Good news, buddy. And you can imagine their response. How would you feel?
Dude, so I imagine the overall readiness and morale of the military, of the Army right now. I know the new sergeant major of the Army, which I think is just a very mascotty position.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's be honest. As speaking from a sergeant major, somebody who went through the Sergeant Major Academy and took 40 hours on military museums as a block of instruction.
Okay.
The enlisted side of it, they're fashion police. Here's 670-1. Go enforce the standards. And when it comes to operational, when it comes to all the seriousness of commands and control, it's put on the officers, which that division sucks, but it's nobody's taking up for the guys. Mm-hmm. And I hope, as the new sergeant major, the new CSM of the Army is a former unit guy, and he's a former special operations guy. I hope he changes things, because it seems like the readiness and the morale is completely destroyed.
It'd be pretty hard at this point to pull that back, because even somebody in that position had to have gone along with at least part of this.
Yeah.
And it's hard because so another investigation pops up, right? I find out that I'm getting internally investigated from MARSOC, right? I've never talked to MARSOC in my life. One of my co-plaintiffs was a Marine, and she got it leaked to her from somebody that was like, hey, anybody who has typed your name into a military computer, Google search, email, anybody that's communicated with you, he's like, we're having to pull all of this stuff together. And I understand the danger of me putting this out right now, because the only CCIR, the only critical incident that has to be reported is a leak of this operation happening, right? Which is something that they were going to root this out. So they're, for some reason, collecting all this data.
Of you guys doing the right thing. Of trying to get information.
And they're not pulling it from our personal emails. It's just inside a military network. So I don't know what kind of workaround they had to do that. But if you're going to investigate people internally, you're probably working with the Bureau. There's things that you have to do to be able to treat people like that. So that's going on. And then we get, there's even more information just keeps coming out. So the DMED data we leak, and then the Pentagon says, oh, there just happens to have been an error for the last 5 years, so we're gonna pull it down. We're gonna fix it, right? And then we'll put it back up. So DMED shuts down because we whistle blew on it, right? And then it comes back up with flatter numbers than the peaks that we were seeing. And here's the interesting part: over the next 6 months, the numbers all peaked again. So they adjusted it and said, well, that's handled. And then it peaked again on its own.
Because they're collecting
the
provider information through the docs.
So it continued to happen. People were still getting hurt. And my concern is that, man, think about just between the people you lost over it, all the injuries inside the force, the retention problems, the morale problem, all those things, the recruiting, think about how much you just debilitated the American military, which again, like this will defend, dude. Like this is something I care about. That means the country. That means the Army. That means like my value system, the Army values. I just tried to hold to that the entire time. And there's a lot of good leaders that did the best for their soldiers throughout this whole thing. You know, and final numbers for guys that got kicked, the Air Force stopped reporting 6 months before the mandate got pulled. But, you know, their final numbers is 8,456 kicked, right? And if you were to total that up with what has been kicked since then, it's now pushing about 10,000. So that means we lost more people over this in a couple of years than all of the war in Iraq, all of the war in Afghanistan, plus everybody in 9/11 combined.
Just in the Air Force?
No, just DOD wide.
Oh, is that DOD wide?
DOD wide.
So we lost 10,000 people who were like, I'm not taking it, and they pushed them out completely?
Right.
Wow.
And even to this day, after the order was finished, there were still 83,000 soldiers or so that were still holding the line, most of them National Guard, that they still had said, like, nope, we're not doing it, and unit, it's on you to kick me out, figure it out. And those numbers started when I first went on Fox. You know, they told me that our initial plaintiff class, because they were trying to file it as a class action, was 430,000 people.
Wow.
So I was like, oh yeah, no pressure, Rob. Like just 500,000 soldiers, like entirely hanging on your ability to pull this off. Because House Armed Services Committee told me, they're like, we don't have enough Republican seats to vote this thing out. We can't stop this, right? It's kind of on you to handle it legally. I was like, it's a crime, man. Like it's already a crime. There's no vote involved. And they kind of got like, that's not really how it works on the Hill. So when my case did finally pop back up 3 days before my retirement date, all of a sudden they're 30 days out. They hit their check mark. Pentagon's freaking out again. Wait, Robert's still in the Army? They're like, where has he been this whole time? How has he gotten this far? And then there's my commander who had protected me that whole time and kept it quiet that I was still in just by saying like, no, I mean, he has this exemption he's waiting on an answer from, you know? So like I said, he did the best he could.
Yeah.
He still went along eventually, you know? But they, you know, they start freaking out, trying to figure out what to do. They'll like stop him, don't let him leave or whatever. Because I think what happened was they figured out like I had hit a pretty significant percentage of DOD disability just from, like I said, back spine, like my TBIs, everything I had going on, pretty much inoperable at this point, just staying on my feet with just handfuls of ibuprofen, right? So they had decided like, yeah, you're unfit for duty. And I think they figured out you can get rid of me quicker if you just approve my retirement. And they tried to rush me out the door then, but they didn't do it fast enough because I still had 3 days left on active duty when it went to court. So we go to court. They don't make a decision. They're like, this is a lot, and we weren't aware of a lot of this. We're going to have to hear this again. The judges weren't basically like really on our side, but it pens for a little while, and then you have the NDAA come up. So there's like budgetary agreements and things like that that are going to happen that both sides of the House are going to have to sign to approve the budget for the DOD. And the conservative side put it up that like if vaccine mandate ends. So we want this. If you want your money for Ukraine, if you want your money for whatever, like if you want to approve that, you're going to rescind the vaccine mandate. So they did that.
They negotiated in a bill in the terms.
In the NDAA, right? So when one of those gets signed every single year. So the problem with that is by doing that, it kind of like, I guess, put everybody off in this section where it's like, there's no accountability anymore. There's no accountability for the people that committed these crimes and anything because we're
Free
not.
Pass.
It is. They're like, yep, well, bygones, whatever, like, and now it's done. And then it takes 30 days to go into effect after January 1st when it was signed. So it's like sometime mid-February, maybe early March that they finally sent the order out and they're like, okay, vaccine order is done. And then, like I said, within a month ago, now you can't have any of, like, all of the EUA stuff disappears from the market. You can't even get it. And I hope people understand that, like, Title 10 Section 1107 protected soldiers, but the EUA didn't protect anybody. So any civilian that voluntarily got something under the EUA label, if something happens to you, there's no legal recourse. You cannot sue Pfizer for it. You voluntarily participated in a post-authorization study. So like even they had no protection on these things. And you know, like, and when the thing came out and they said, we have the approved stuff, certain vials started showing up in like certain like bases, 4 or 5 at a time. They're like, oh, you wanted the label thing? You want Comirnaty? Here it is. And popping up and guys are asking us questions. They're like, hey man, I thought you said this wasn't produced. I was like, it wasn't. Get me the lot number. We dig into it. It's produced overseas. They brought this stuff up in like Australia or in the UK, which has different rules about EUA. They can use the approved label before it's fully approved because they don't have an FDA in the UK. Mm-hmm. They have a different version. So somebody sourced foreign vials that still don't meet the standard, and then tried to bait and switch with some of our soldiers just to try to get a few more numbers out of that thing. And like, if people remember high school chemistry, if you don't precisely mix exact proportions of the two or however many chemicals as they're supposed to be, you have a new compound, a different name, different properties. It goes from being healing to being lethal, whatever. So when they said that it was the same formulation and it was interchangeable in their memos, like it had redacted ingredients and things all in different proportions. So we're like, how is that the same thing? You know, like I said, basic high school chemistry, you know, and then what you learn as a kid, like, oh, you got this like sickness and you have natural immunity. Like they just like squashed all the things that we always knew and just said, we don't care, you're getting it.
Wow.
So
the guy that you left behind in your unit that was fighting, like standing in the line, you said, he's good now, but he went through basically 2 years of hell.
Yeah, I mean, they took his hat and badge. They pulled him off the line or whatever and just put him in like an admin role. He was no longer allowed to train soldiers. He was just kind of sequestered until like we were chaptering him, just like one of the punk kids from basic training that like, you know, so starting fights all the time.
They were chaptering him?
Literally a chapter, right? So that's another thing that's really important. And I want to make sure this gets out because the people that listen to this podcast and that like, I think people like you care about, like those 10,000 soldiers, they got kicked under a general under honorable discharge, which means that a lot of them lost their GI Bill. So even though they didn't go to jail over it and they're not going to lose their like right to own guns and stuff, they took away any chance of these people ever having a future. Some of the discharge codes on there it's in the same category as like people that commit like sexual assaults, basically for the misconduct that they gave them on their DD-214s. So these people are now struggling to explain that when they go get jobs and stuff.
Wow.
And these are like qualified, well-trained soldiers that like are, you know, willing to work hard and are brave enough to speak up when something's going wrong. And now they're the hardest to find and hire, but these people are out there and they need help, you know? And that's like
insane.
Yeah. And I don't have a place that, you know, it's collected that we can put something out like, hey, if you've got space for them, put it up on this.com. I wish I did. You know, I don't, but it's like, you know, when those people come across your desk, like understand that they did what they swore to do. You know, they did what you asked of them, you know, foreign and domestic, right? Like they did that whole thing. As hokey and tongue in cheek as that stuff sounds, like they really lived it. They held the line. They stuck to their values. They knew they were right. And then everything that we said, you know, my girlfriend, she has 180,000 followers on Instagram, right? And she had 220,000 before that. She's gotten shadow banned to now where she has maybe 100 viewers of her story because she tried to help us. And now everything that she put out that they were like, oh, this is misinformation, all of it's now true. Everything that they came out with, they're like, oh yeah, well actually myocarditis is a problem. And
there's no recourse for any of it, right?
No. And
so your guy who had his badge, his drill badge and his hat taken, and was going to be chaptered, is he going to be restored?
So here's the thing. A lot of those guys, and I only spoke to him a couple weeks ago. He's still a busy guy. He was like, hey, I'm good now. I'm staying in. I'm no longer getting kicked, but there's still HRC flags. So like his ability to progress or to make E7 and stuff like that is like permanently hamstrung until they can get that a little bit straightened out. He had orders back to another unit. Like everything got canceled and pulled. So he's trying to like rebuild his career and get back on track now in the middle of this thing. But like I said, these guys are still dealing with these like shadow policies and like some of the fallout from what happened. So he personally, I don't know if they put him back on the trail yet. I owe him a phone call for sure and to find out anyway. But like I said, you know, he did the best he could and then he did want to stay. And that was the thing that bothered him the whole time. And it hurt because guys at the unit would tell us all the time, they're like, man, we love working with you guys and you're so good at your jobs. And like, you know, I was like number 2 out of 12 for like drill sergeant of the cycle, my first cycle. Like generally that's voted amongst the drills. So they either like you and you're a team player or not. Yeah. So I got put into that position and they were like, oh, we just wish you guys were staying in. And like, you know, we'd about throw our hats, you know, just like, are you serious? Like, you know, like, and they're like, well, if anything ever happens, you know, we got your back. And we're just like, dude, something did happen and no one had our backs. Like everyone.
How did not, what I'm confused about, I mean, I would have been one of those guys because I would have took the vaccine and I would have stood in principle. I would have likely been in your shoes in some capacity. And I know a lot of Green Berets, a lot of SEALs, a lot of guys who refused it, who said, kick me out, do whatever you want to. We are not taking this. And when you look at the amount of people who did, is it surprising to you the amount of people who jumped on the bandwagon out the gate?
So not really, because like I myself, you know, I was like, I was on a basically an emergency recall status for like a variety of different missions. The 82nd has a version of that.
Yeah.
I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about. But they have a version of that I was like on 2-hour recall for years, right, for this thing. And, you know, depending on where you're going, you're getting Japanese encephalitis and like yellow fever. And like, I mean, they're just sticking you with whatever because you're just like, yeah, I'm on the mission. My boys are not going without me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to JMPI my own dudes. I'm going to put them out the aircraft and I'm going with them, you know? And like, that was the type of leader that I was. So I never questioned it, you know? And then I've got 11 flu shots, you know? Like, I got it every year because like, oh, you need your flu shot. Sure, man. But that had a process, you know? And then even anthrax, I've got a bunch of now.
Yeah.
But it took 17 years after that case for them to get actual approval to push that shot through. You know, like I said, this is just a process that just, you can't just do it overnight.
It was the haste that bothered you.
It was.
About it. Yeah.
It was, and then it was just the enforcement. Because like if I was like, I don't want to get a flu shot, they'd be like, yeah, well, you need to. But if I say I don't want to get a COVID shot, it was like, you will. Like you close your mouth. Like, you know, it was just this crazy overreaction that was kind of the red flag to be like, man, something is not right about this.
Interesting. Yeah, the psychology in that is very different. And now, do you have stats on injury? Because injury is significant, and it's significant for many reasons. Personally, for people who got the shot and who are dealing with those things, myocarditis. I mean, my own media guy, like the head of my media, who's in this room, literally is dealing with these issues,
right?
Because it's a serious repercussion of something in haste. When you go back and you look at the force and the strength of the force, it's based not just on morale, but physical readiness, and how much of the force has been affected by this, and what kind of injuries are we looking at?
So I wish I could give you current numbers on that stuff. Like me retiring kind of pulled me by the wayside for access to a lot of that stuff, and rightfully so. But I mean, you look at like a lot of the pilots, you're seeing a lot of helicopters go down across the force. I don't know if you've noticed.
Interesting. I never even, like, until you said something, they shut down rotary wing for a period of time to figure out what was going on.
They did. And if you'll find like every single time they will come up with some other excuse.
Yeah.
Like, but no
Birds have never gone down before, by the way.
Not like this. Yeah. And then even Teresa Long is an aviation unit brigade surgeon. Right. So like she is seeing this, and this is why she had this data. She's like, no, I'm seeing it in person. She's like, I have 3 people in my own unit that have testicular cancer out of nowhere. Like, this isn't a thing that you're just like, oh, wow, what a weird season to have, you know, like this isn't pollen. This isn't climate change. You know what I mean? Like, this is something very deliberate going on, and no one will allow us to talk about it.
Oh my God.
I mean, to be honest, like you're the first person from any of the companies we reached out to even to like be willing to take time to sit and say this, because I get it. It's nuclear waste. It's like radioactive. No one wants to touch it. Nobody wants to even believe it's true half the time. And it's scary. And there's so many more layers to this. I mean, I could talk for a 10-part series about this, honestly. But it's just like, you know, just like war is, especially in like the soft community, not every hero is going to get their story told. And like, maybe they deserve that. But the truth is that like their legend lives on, and the people that cared about them, the people they took care of, like they know it. And that is all through the force right now. And there is a handful of good, really solid people that still care that are left in that 83,000. There's a lot of people that, like I said, held the line. Like I said, there's just so many different parts of this. And what scares me is what kind of force does that leave behind? Right. You have like the border situation right now, right? Where you're going to have another thing come down the line where they're like, hey, just hold the gate open for these dudes. Don't touch anybody. Just get out of their way, you know? And they're like almost facilitating an invasion, right? Which I think is tied to a few different things or whatever. But those guys are probably going to do it because they're getting used to just like the COVID years. You just do what you were told. Every single person thought they had the ultimate authority at every level. Mm-hmm. And then they just never let that power go. So you have that question of like, what are they willing to do? You know, at this point, just because they're following orders, they're developing that force. Like I said, an ideological purge, they told me 3 years prior to what we're seeing now. And so that's it's just like a really good question when you look at things internally, when you talk about things like the risk of martial law or how things could happen like that. And does it take a force of bad guys? No, it didn't take, you know, a force of bad people at Ruby Ridge, but it took a bad sniper and a bad team leader and a lot of people that weren't willing to say anything. You know, and that's like, if you have that kind of force, if you have a few bad actors that are taking the initiative on those things and a bunch of people that don't know how to speak up or aren't willing to, it's a super dangerous thing to, you know, to look at. And I don't know where that's going. But it is, like I said, it's something that guys like me are concerned with, you know?
Yeah. Compliance is crazy, man. And we we showed our ass. A lot of people made a lot of mistakes, and we saw what institutions were truly capable of. I think you should be on Sean Ryan's podcast. I mean, the long form of Sean Ryan is one of the best platforms in long form to tell this story. We're limited by a time constraint. But again, digging in the weeds and then having multiple layers, journalistic layers of telling this story. I'll certainly talk about it in my Prep Life episode.
Awesome.
It's very important to keep communicating about. That's personal courage. I mean, it's one of the values and ethos of being in the military. It's something that we took serious when I was hanging around our dog tags in basic training.
Yeah.
And something that you had to teach these young men. What are you doing now? What are you doing now that you're out? You're retired.
So ironically, not even ironically, just completely expectedly, the VA left me hanging a little bit on, they're like, hey, you'll have this little bit of VA money to help you out. It took months and months to roll over. So I kind of found myself like, oh, we'll get any more of that DOD money, right? So I still have a security clearance. I've been doing a little bit of contracting work. I've been assisting with training in different places. And then I also now recently picked up a job where I'm working full-time for a firearms manufacturer here in Utah. So I build ARs, test fire, and like just make sure they're going out to the customer actually working, you know?
Yeah.
So like a lot of that stuff will come through my hands.
The QC of it.
Yeah, there's a big part of that. I recently started my own podcast with them because they had just been kind of like a Amazon.com of gun parts for a long time.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I want to talk to more people. Like we have very affordable stuff, budget, we'll call it. Firearms for people. We're putting it out there, but like you're talking about like, these people aren't our market. Dan Robert isn't our customer. I was like, well, how do I do that? Like, how do I pull those people in? So I started some informational stuff. I want to look into a little bit of training that a lot of guys are having my ear for right now. I want to start like opening that part of the company up. And then I started doing a lot of internal training. I developed some internal training documents for customer service so that I can improve the quality that we're giving back to our customers.
Yeah.
I was like, you're hiring people off the streets. People are calling. They're like, hey man, I don't know what twist rate do I need for a 20-inch barrel if I'm shooting this grain ammo? And they're just like, oh man, I don't know. So I was like, hey, let's fix that. So
what's the name of the company?
Davidson Defense.
Davidson?
Yep.
Davidson Defense. And that's a Utah.
Yep. It's in Orem, Utah. So
that's right on the road, man.
Yeah, it's down the road. And then we test fire our weapons right at Ready Gunner. People see us all the time.
Awesome.
Pushing carts of 50 to 100 rifles in there. Just, put it on the elevator, go in, then run stuff through, take our notes and get out of there. So when people see us coming and going, like we're trying to get your stuff running and make sure it's like functional when it gets out there. Cause like I said, I keep coming back to it, but this will defend, man. Like that is a part that I really care about. So like me having investment in people having like functioning firearms in their homes, something I care a lot about. So this is kind of my place that I've been able to do that. And it was only now that things have kind of quieted down that I had an opportunity to like, all right, I think it is time. And I want to talk about this maybe a couple more times. And then like, I kind of have to have closure on everything that happened to me.
Yeah.
I mean, how long can I keep reliving the last 3 years?
Yeah.
Never forget, maybe not even forgive. But like, I think that I can't take it out of myself anymore for the things that, it's like at the end of Schindler's List that he's like, my watch, I could have sold this and I could have saved, this is 2 more people, and that's how I was starting to feel when I retired. I was like, did I leave those people hanging? And it's just the messages that came in, the outpour of support. People were like, no, dude, you did more than anybody historically. And we all built off of your message. And I'm not making this about me. I'm just saying like the enduring human spirit that like these people had to like continue the fight after like this leader was taken away. Because like if you've seen like I don't know, do you guys have a similar thing like JRTC you train at?
Yeah.
Right. So what happens when the guys come over? They'll find whoever's doing the most. They're like, hey, you're dead, lay down. And just see what the team does without the leader, without somebody who's taking charge. And, I got to see that force wide for 83,000 at least plus people. And like they continue to do the right thing after I was gone. And like that meant a lot to me. That was a lasting effect that I cared about because I know that is preserving a part of the force that it really needs. And I think it's going to need really hard in the next like couple of years. I think as things come down the line, it's really important that you have people that like are knowledgeable and like will look at stuff and be like, hey, this doesn't look right. I'm willing to say something, I'm willing to do something about it. And like to step up and say that it takes a lot of courage. Corporal Arnett, had you seen anything about her?
No.
I don't know how much time we have left. But so she was in Okinawa in the Marines. She had refused the shot. And then they said, you're going to fly back to the States to be discharged. And she refused to get on the plane. She's like, if I get on that plane, I'm admitting that you're right. She's like, I'm not going anywhere, right? So she ends up putting herself in a position where she's basically homeless, in Japan, to stand up and say like, no, I'm not admitting you're right. Like, we're going to talk about this. We're going to do this. This is a corporal or a lance corporal at the time in the Marine Corps. This is a E3, this is a very young service member. She held the line all the way until it ended up basically they declared her AWOL, I believe is how they did it, and then put her in prison. And she only recently got released from prison stateside after like a large social media outcry. A lot of people like calling in, making phone calls, writing to senators and stuff like that. I mean, very recently, Pipehitters Foundation, I believe, was tied in with that. But like, if you look into Corporal Arnett, I mean, like, I don't look at what I did as bravery, right? So like I said, and I'm the last person to talk about myself in this way. Like I said in that phone call, this is my responsibility. Like, this is the minimum standard that an NCO in my position, in a position of trust as a drill sergeant, I owe this to my soldiers and my peers. Like, absolutely, I have to do this. People like Arnett didn't necessarily have like a team of attorneys and all these doctor friends and like all this access. And like, she's a staff sergeant. It's harder to push us around, They did it on their own. So she was on her own in a room with a doctor and said no. And they're like, nope, this is everything that's going to happen to you. And she still sat there and she said no. And that is bravery.
Yeah.
The PFCs, I have a NCO that came over from the Navy with a 18 X-ray contract, stud dude, super smart, like great at PT, everything, had some questions about it, didn't want to get the shot. They yanked his 18X contract quick. And then he kicked around Benning for a while he just waited to be discharged. And he came over there, transferred over there with like all these hopes and dreams, started doing the right thing. Like I said, intelligent, like experienced dude. And he got kicked, and he's out now. And it's like, all these people, all these opportunities, all these great people we lost over this thing. And like I said, you just have to sit back and ask, like, what was it for?
Yeah.
And what is the final effect of these things? And I can tell stories about any of these people, like I said, for the next 100 years, talk about every little individual case, and like I said, their bravery. And that's what that took, that personal courage. Like you said, that's an Army value.
Yeah.
And they lived it. They did. And like I said, I have so much respect for them.
Yeah.
So
same. We all do. I mean, it sounds like the same definitive mission, which is purpose. And now you got a different mission set, which is evolving yourself in your own individual way and then continue to tell their stories. Because if you tell their stories, at least people are educated and can make informed decisions in the future. Where can people find the stuff that you got going on?
So right now they just started a YouTube channel for Davidson Defense. It's a couple of other companies. They are kind of fall under them, like Delta Team Tactical, maybe you've heard of. Like, it's also very like broad, gun parts names, like it'd be kind of hard to find. But the Davidson Defense storefront they have down there in Orem, and then like I said, we have a YouTube channel that just started. It's got like 3 followers. I think I'm 2 of them. But that's like stuff that's going to keep getting put out. My Instagram page, Dynadan 1987 is what's on there. And like I said, that's kind of where most of the focal point of that stuff was. I always push out that content and stuff like that, and just like looking to build it and build that community, get to know more people out here and stuff like that, and see what I can do, to still build that strength in this area. So
yeah, I appreciate you, man. Appreciate you sharing your story. You guys could find the links down below, but I appreciate you talking openly and honestly about everything that took place with you.
I appreciate you taking the time to hear it. It means a lot to me, and it's awesome to meet you, honestly. Like, you've been somebody I looked up to for a long time, so this is a cool like opportunity for me in a lot of different ways, but it means the most to me that you cared enough to hear it. So thank you. And thank to everyone here.
Yeah. Thanks guys. Check out the links down below. Black Rifle Coffee Podcast. You guys could see the links to his YouTube, links to his Instagram, and get involved. Share your stories. When we start posting about this on social media and comments, start sharing your stories of things that you saw, because there's a lot of issues still working through. It's a constant thing. And like I said, never forget and never forgive. Till next time. Peace out, guys. Joining the Black Rifle Coffee Club is like setting your coffee delivery to autopilot. As a club member, you get your favorite premium BRCC roast delivered fresh to your doorstep. All you have to do is pick your coffee, select the amount you want, then set the delivery schedule, and you're done. Easy as that. Not only will you get to knock coffee off your grocery list for good, but you also save cash over time since members get free shipping on deliveries. Club members also get exclusive discounts with partners like Fieldcraft Survival, Cryptek, Sig Sauer, and more. Join the Black Rifle Coffee Club today. Start saving and enjoy the peace of mind that your coffee has been taken care of.
That concludes today's training. Any questions? Woo! Drum titties, boy!